America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker with the Job Creators Network. Many parents assume public schools are simply neutral places of learning funded by taxpayers. But critics argue they've increasingly become ideological training grounds shaped by progressive education theory and political activism. Joining us today is Robert Bortins, CEO of Classical Conversations and co-author of Woke and Weaponized: How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education and How We Can Win It Back. His organization supports classical Christian homeschool communities across all 50 states and dozens of countries. Robert, welcome to Main Street Matters.
Hey, thanks for having me on, and excited to be here today.
Excellent. Well, I read your background. I found it really interesting how Classical Conversations got started. Tell us, your mom started this because she didn't like how the public schools were working. You're one of three or four kids?
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of four boys, and so it's a rambunctious household. And my mom decided to homeschool us early on, and homeschooled us through high school. But when we were getting into high school, she realized, she wanted us to do things like debate and, science experiments and things that required more than one person really to be involved. And so she started Classical Conversations in our basement in 1997 with myself and 10 other students. And so Classical Conversations now is in over 50 countries, and of course every single state of the union, helping hundreds of thousands of people homeschool. But at that time, it was just 10 of us. And so she saw that homeschooling shouldn't be lone schooling, and that it's helpful to have a group of peers to talk with. And so, so she's always been an entrepreneur at heart and a business lady. And so the first year went great. Other people wanted it for their kids, and it's just kind of grown from that basement to this kind of worldwide phenomenon of parents helping parents to homeschool through high school. And it's been quite a blessing. And I received an industrial engineering degree, worked for a couple of Fortune 50 companies. So I was able to show that homeschooling worked personally for myself. And I just enjoyed it so much. In 2012, I decided to come work for the family business. At that time, we were in about 40 states with about 40,000 students. And so we've just had tremendous growth since then. And there's so many small business owners and entrepreneurs that use our program to give their kids a classical Christian education.
I'm curious, in 1996, there's been so much change since COVID. And so for a lot of parents, that was kind of the awakening of this whole, woke culture in schools, and that parents really felt like their children were being shortchanged as well on their education. So it was kind of a twofold thing that happened in schools. But for someone like yourself, who's been part of this movement since 1996, first of all, how much support did your mom get in the community to do this in 1996? Because I don't think it was so popular back then. And probably, I'm assuming she received some criticism for it as well. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I was a high school boy, so I wasn't necessarily paying that much attention. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of support at that time. And even churches at that point were like, why are you homeschooling your kid? You should send them to public school. So even like pastors didn't understand what was going on. But my mom, she had a very interesting life growing up, went to public school, private schools, Catholic schools, experienced a lot of the bullying and sexual harassment type stuff that kids experience today. And my dad's actually 9 years older than my mom, and they met doing an aerospace engineering degree. And so she saw that he had a different sort of education than she had had. And so she was always kind of interested in what that was. And later on in life, she discovered that it was a classical education that he had received in the public school system, but just being, that much older than her, it had changed that much in just 9 years in the 60s and 70s. And so that's why she decided to homeschool at that time. And a lot of what we saw in 2020, when a lot of parents woke up, she had experienced and had seen firsthand 20, 30 years earlier. It just wasn't so prevalent. And, it has really degraded over the last decade or so. And so that's why we see this, choice movement and this movement to, get kids more opportunities, because our public schools, which have been slowly failing, have now quickly been failing our students. And something about 34% of students can read at grade level. Meanwhile, a recent study, two of them actually, one said 12% and one said, I believe, 17% of high school graduates have been sexually harassed by an employee of the public school, whether it be like a teacher or janitor or somewhere in between. And so parents are seeing that this is not a healthy situation for their children, and they're looking for other opportunities, whether it's a private school or charter schools or, 3-day-a-week university model schools, homeschooling. There's so many more opportunities now for parents. And, one of the things that we've always seen is entrepreneurs and business people who think outside the box, looking for education for their own children that might be different than what the mainstream is offering. And so it's really been cool to see homeschooling grow from about 50,000 students, when I started homeschooling in the 80s, to over almost 4 million students today. And so I really think that number is going to keep rising.
Well, for parents who may not know, what exactly is classical education? How does it differ from, modern public schooling?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing is classical education is tied around what's called the trivium, which is grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. But for your audience, the thing to know is it's how you learn anything. So how you learn something, there's actually a process that your brain goes through, and those are the 3 stages of that process. And so for classical educators, we spend 12 years teaching kids the process of learning. So whatever's thrown at them the rest of their lives, they can do. And so like most jobs, about 90% of what you're going to do at that job, the job actually teaches it to you. So classically educated students are primed and ready to go in the job market. And what we do in classical education as well is go read original source documents. So many books now, especially in the public school system, are being written by woke professors who don't necessarily have kids, want to have kids. They think the world is overpopulated, and they're writing history through their own lens. And so what we do in classical education is we go back and we read the Federalist Papers, we read the Magna Carta, we read the Constitution, we learn geography, we learn logic, we study Latin, and all the time we're practicing those stages and those tools of learning. And so we're going back, instead of doing an inch deep and a mile wide, which is kind of what the public school does, we would rather go a mile deep on just a few things and really get that core, really brain paths established, so that AI is not going to take any sort of classical educated student's job in the future, because we all know how to ask good questions, how to write good prompts, and how to really react to whatever the world throws at us. So that's really what we're trying to do at Classical Conversations and Classical Education in general, is create students that will be anti-fragile and flourish whatever comes in this world.
Well, I think some of the points you raise are so important because, obviously we advocate on behalf of small business owners. And so I talk to small business owners every day. And besides the costs of just doing business and regulations, hiring the right people who are competent and skilled enough to be trained, because you're right, we all really do come in to a job and we learn that job there. It's on the job training, no matter what level you're coming in at. But that is one of their biggest challenges, their biggest costs, because it's so expensive to have employee turnover. And so, we used to think that the indoctrination was happening on college campuses. But we've seen it go younger and younger than high school. Now we're seeing it in elementary schools, and it's happening directly from teachers and administrators. And it's just the directionally of these schools, these public schools. And so I'll go back to that point with COVID. It truly was uncovered, I think, for the vast majority of Americans during COVID when they were watching their children online. And I just think it's so important for parents to be involved. But, every parent can't be involved for whatever the reason. Sometimes they, are too busy with their jobs, or they've got multiple children, or, I could list a multitude of
Sure.
reasons. But I think having choice is just so important for parents to be in charge of making those decisions about how their kids learn is so important. So I'm glad that your organization exists, and I'm glad that you wrote this book.
Yeah, so a couple of things, like a lot of parents, they might make better or different choices if they really understood the dark history of, unfortunately, our government school system. And the first person, like you hear of Horace Mann, most people have heard of him. He said, "We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause." And what causes that? Well, he was an atheist, so he wanted to destroy religion, the moral fabric of the United States. And so he knew that he could use the government school system by infiltrating the teachers' colleges to do that. And we have a quote in the book from the Ford Foundation president, I believe it was in the 1970s, before the wall fell. And he was being interviewed by Norm Dodd, who was going to ask him what they were doing, because USAID, that corruption's been going on for a long time. And the foundation president said, what we're trying to do is successfully merge the Soviet Union in the United States. And he didn't mean by bringing free capitalism to the Soviet Union. What he meant was bringing collectivism to the United States. And so they've been financing basically the teachers' colleges for a long time. And so that's why you mentioned earlier, which was accurate, that it started in the colleges, but they did that by indoctrinating the teachers. My wife was a public school teacher for 10 years, so she saw it firsthand. And then teachers think that they're doing a good job because that's what they've been taught to do in the school system, in the when they're being getting their degrees. And so you've got really good people like my wife trying to do the best they can, but they're doing it in a system that was inherently designed to bring basically collectivism, whether it's socialism or fascism or democrat socialism or communism, here to the United States, and putting it into our young people, which is, of course, you see like Mondami in New York City. That's why people like him are getting elected. And of course, he said that we want to give up the cold, cold individualism for the warmth of collectivism. But because they're not teaching history anymore, students don't know that collectivism has killed over 100 million people over the last 125 years or so across the globe. And so it really is undermining our faith, family, and values. And that's really the intention of it. And that's why parents have to be involved. Like, you might not be at a homeschool, you might not be able to send them to your school of choice all the time, even in school choice states, but you can read to them at night. You can have conversations with your kids. All of us can spend 20 or 30 minutes with them, having these conversations, and especially the importance of having free market capitalism in our country if we're going to really establish a flourishing life for our families and for our country in the future. And so that's why we wrote Woke and Weaponized, so that parents could be armed with the knowledge of the history of the school system, why we are where we are today. A lot of people think that the public school system is broken. I believe our book shows that the public school system is working just exactly as the founders intended it to. They just had a different view of the world than most parents do, and a desire for the next generation that's contrary to most parents' desire for their children. And again, it's not the teachers. My wife was in the system for 10 years. She loved the kids. She wanted to do as good by them as she could. But the system just chews them up and spits them out. And that's why turnover for teachers is so high, because the system doesn't support the teachers doing the right thing. It supports the system gaining more power.
What do you think about the not that's not a political question. It's just curious from a structural standpoint. Um, the Trump administration wanting to get rid of the Department of Education. What impact do you think that will have in terms of education quality within the public school system?
Yeah, unfortunately, he's not really getting rid of the Department of Education. So there's two things to be realized: that Congress passes laws, and so they're getting rid of the Department of Education potentially, but they're still moving all of those laws and all of those things that the Department of Education has done to different departments, like the Department of Labor or Department of Human and Health Services and things like that. So the federal government, even with the ending of the Department of Education, will still be involved in education, and that's unconstitutional. And that's nothing that Trump can be really in charge of. Unfortunately, we have to have Congress pass a law and repeal these things, like Every Child Succeeds Act that was passed in the 1950s by communists to undermine our country. And until those laws are repealed and it goes back to the states and the federal government gets out of education, period, not just ending the Department of Education, but ending every single law that dictates how states have to behave. Until that happens, we will still be on a decline. But I tip my hat to him because we need to end the Department of Education. But that's just we can't be a magic trick where that ends and people think that everything is solved. We have to end the laws that they implement.
That's a great point, and I like that you take it a little bit deeper. Obviously, there is only so much the executive branch can do if Congress isn't going to cooperate, and we don't see a lot of that, unfortunately, these days in Congress in terms of
Yeah. I mean,
cooperation.
I think the Trump administration is doing all they can legally in moving things in the right direction, but what we need is action in Congress.
Hmm. Yeah, in a lot of areas for sure. We talked a little bit about free enterprise, and I think it's so important to make that connection between having the skills that you learn in school and the right history to understand what made this country the greatest country on earth, and why America is the country that a lot of other people want to come to. We are the leading the economic leader in the world. And the reason why is because of our free market system and how it was built. And if our students are not learning that and they're learning about the warmth of socialism and the warmth of collectivism, it sure sounds warm and cozy to hear that story told if you don't hear the other story told and the opportunities that can come your way in this country versus other countries that have that warmth of collectivism. Um, but I'm curious, what signs should parents look for if they suspect that their child's education is becoming more ideological than academic?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to public school, even if you have great teachers there, I mean, more than likely the curriculum is going to be that way because the companies that write the curriculum are also owned by collectivists, and so that's being fed into the school. So the teachers either have to reject the curriculum, like my wife did, and she gets her hand slapped by administrators, or not. And so the biggest thing to do is just don't see straight A's on your kid's report card and think they're getting the same education that you got 20 years ago. So you need to be involved. You need to be asking questions. What are they learning about, and things of that nature, and having conversations around your dinner table about what you believe and what your family believes, and how different rules or laws or red tape affects your family, because they're not going to be getting that in the systems, even the good ones. And so yeah, I think it's important to understand and have conversations with your kids, because there's not going to be like a telltale sign of it. But we saw in COVID that it was really ubiquitous across the country, that it didn't matter what school system you were in, if you were in a red state or purple state or blue state, a conservative county or a liberal county, they all had the same curriculum being fed into it, being administrated by these teachers who are again, forced to do whatever the system tells it to do, or they'll lose their job. So yeah, parents, I think you have to, have good conversations with your kids and just let them know that you want to have conversations around some of these ideas. And hey, if your teacher says this, please let me know, because we need to help you understand what's really going on.
Interesting. Um, so Job Creators Network has worked in the education freedom space for the last few years at the state level, and working with some of the states that have been able to pass education freedom savings accounts. Our goal would be to have all 50 states pass universal education freedom. Some of them have passed some level of it. Some of them have passed, 100% universal. Florida's got universal education freedom. Georgia passed some level of it. Texas has universal education freedom. And that's the idea that the dollars will follow the child. So, but it puts parents in charge of deciding where and how their children are educated. So if private school or parochial school or even another public school in another district is what you want for your child, that you get to make that decision, and those tax dollars will follow your child. And there's a lot of critics out there for a lot of reasons. They say that it'll deplete money from the schools, and I'm curious what you think, because I just think if it's a bad school and parents are taking their kids out, then it should close. I mean, it's clear that is the consumer speaking loud and clear. When you take your children out of school in mass numbers, that they close. And I'll give you an example. In my county, I woke up this morning to an article that said Orange County School Board votes on closure of several schools. Several? Do you count that as 2 or 3? No, not 2 or 3 schools. 7. 7 schools closing in Orange County due to low enrollment. And the reasons that they list, among others, more families opting for taxpayer-funded vouchers. And I think that is the free market speaking. And that is the argument that we have made all along, that the free market will speak, and it will make the good schools better, and it will get rid of the bad schools.
Yeah, well, we have a couple chapters on school choice in our book, Woke and Weaponized, to talk about what school choice laws work well and which ones may have some problems underneath the skin that many people haven't really thought about. And we have a whole chapter on Sweden and their school choice, issues and what went well and what maybe went sideways on people. But yeah, I'm happy whenever a government institution closes down. Institutional people look for institutions for solutions, but real solutions are when we take responsibility for ourselves. And so I think it's important for every family to take their personal responsibility. And, it's let's not wait for the government to bail us out. We can start making sacrifices and supporting each other today, whether, those laws have been passed or not. But yeah, I mean, the big thing for, I think, conservatives and Christians is that what we see is that the left isn't having kids anymore. And so the only way they can indoctrinate them is through the public school system. And they've been very successful at that. And that's definitely got to get stopped as quickly as possible. So I'd encourage, churches to start education scholarships or open their doors to homeschool co-ops or 3-day-a-week, schools, or even a small private school. I'd encourage small business owners to, match education savings accounts for their employees. We've got the new Trump tax credits at the federal level. Go see if that's maybe a way to divert your taxes to a nonprofit instead of a woke school district. So I think there's a lot of positive movements, and the biggest one is that parents are taking more responsibility and interest in their children's education. And as a Christian, the Bible says, God will heal our land when the fathers' hearts turn back to their kids. And so, I'm optimistic that more fathers' hearts are turning back to their own children.
I love it. I have a very good friend she's like a executive in a large company, and she has the flexibility to be home, but she can't actually do the homeschooling.
Sure.
But she made the decision, I mean, as soon as her son started high school, that was not the school for him, not the place for him to be. There was bullying happening, not the curriculum. So he's doing an online high school, but she's able, because she has the flexibility to work from home, she is able to see the curriculum. She is able to oversee directly that he's getting it done, that he's putting the time in, but it's the right environment for him. And she has that choice because of the state laws that have been passed, and he's thriving because of it. And he wasn't thriving initially. So, and he's doing really well, and he has outside activities. So I'm really happy for them. But, I would like to see all states have state laws that allow parents to have those choices. For parents who feel overwhelmed by the idea of homeschooling, what are the first steps that you would recommend for somebody who can homeschool and wants to take that direction?
Yeah, well, personal bias, I'd go to classicalconversations.com and put in your zip code, and we'll actually connect you with a local homeschooling mom or dad to answer your questions and talk to you about your state laws and what homeschooling's like in your area. And even if you don't choose Classical Conversations, they'd be happy to do that. And then there's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and then each state has a homeschool really lobby that helps keep homeschooling free and accessible in your state. So if you just type your state name in a homeschool association, that will pop up, and they'll have a ton of resources there. There's if you've ever been to like a job fair or a business fair before, and you go look at all the vendors and vendors halls, there's a homeschool conference in your state that's going to be just like that has a ton of resources there for you. Inspirational speakers. And at Classical Conversations, we have free one-day boot camps. We call them parent practicums during the summer. You don't have to be in Classical Conversations to attend, but you can take the day off work, spend 6 hours with us, and we'll break down the basics of homeschooling and how you can get started and see if that's something of interest to you.
Excellent. Well, give us that website again for Classical Conversations.
Yeah, go to classicalconversations.com and just put in your zip code. Classical and conversations, one big word, so your fingers will get a little bit tired typing it into the browser. And then my book, Woke and Weaponized, is on Amazon.com now.
That's what I was going to ask for next, but thank you very much for that plug too. Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode.